So, what's the real difference between a casual promise you make to a friend and a legally binding contract? It's not just the words you use, you know? There's this one specific legal ingredient that acts like glue, holding the whole thing together. Today, we're unpacking that very ingredient: consideration.
Okay, let's make this real. Picture this. You promise your friend free pizza if they'll help you move into your new apartment. They spend all Saturday lugging boxes up 3 flights of stairs, you're exhausted, and at the end of the day, you totally forget the pizza. Can they actually sue you? I mean, is that promise a real enforceable contract? This is exactly where our topic for today becomes super important.
And the answer to that pizza question all comes down to one powerful legal idea: consideration. Simply put, the law sees it as the price paid for a promise. You've probably heard the Latin term quid pro quo, right? Well, that's exactly what this is: something for something. That pizza wasn't just a friendly gesture, it was the legal price for your friend's hard work.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll dive into what the price of a promise actually means. Then, we'll get into the specific rules for what makes consideration valid. After that, a little plot twist: can a total stranger sue on a contract? And finally, we'll look at the rare exceptions, when a free promise can actually count in court.
Okay, first up, the price of a promise. Let's figure out what legally counts as that something you get in return.
So you can think of consideration as having two sides of the same coin. On one side, it can be a benefit to the person making the promise, getting paid or receiving goods or services. But on the other side, it can be a detriment to the person receiving the promise. Now, that word sounds a little negative, but in law, it just means giving something up. That could be your time, your effort, or even a legal right, like the right to sue someone. Both of these are totally valid forms of consideration.
All right, let's move on to the rules of valid consideration. Think of this as the law's official checklist to see if an exchange is legitimate.
Now, there are a few rules, but these 3 are the real heavy hitters. First, it has to be something the promisor actually asked for. Second, the value doesn't have to be fair, but it has to be real. And third, it can cover actions in the past, present, or future. We're going to really zoom in on those first 2 because that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, rule number 1, and this is a huge one. The consideration must be requested by the promisor. You can't just voluntarily do something nice for someone and then turn around and demand they pay you for it. If they didn't ask you to do it, your action, no matter how helpful, doesn't count as legal consideration.
And there's a classic case that shows this perfectly: Durga Prasad versus Baldio. Here's a story. A guy built a market, but he did it because the town collector asked him to. Later, the shop tenants who moved in promised to pay him a commission for his trouble, but then they backed out. He sued them. The court sided with the tenants. And why? Because the tenants, the people he wanted the commission from, had never actually asked him to build the market. No request, no consideration, no contract. Simple as that.
All right, on to our second rule. And trust me, this is the one that catches a lot of people by surprise. The law says that consideration does not need to be adequate. What does that mean? It means the court really doesn't care if you made a good deal or a terrible one. As long as something of value is exchanged, the contract stands.
So let's push this idea to its logical, kind of crazy conclusion. Does this mean you could legally sell a house worth, say, 60 lakhs for just 10 lakhs? Is that a real enforceable agreement, or would a judge just laugh it out of court for being so unfair? And the answer, believe it or not, is yes. You absolutely can. A contract is not considered void just because the price seems ridiculously low. The law is built on the idea of freedom of contract, and that includes the freedom to make a bad bargain. But, and this is a very important but, here's the catch. While a bad deal isn't illegal, a shockingly low price can be a massive red flag for the court. They might start asking questions like, was this person forced into this deal? Were they tricked? Was their consent freely given? So, if the price is wildly inadequate, the court can use that as evidence that something fishy was going on. The law isn't a price checker, it's a protector of genuine, willing consent.
All right, now for a real plot twist in contract law. Can a total stranger, someone not even involved in the agreement, sue to enforce it? This brings us to something called the doctrine of privity of contract, and of course, its loopholes.
So, the basic rule is pretty straightforward. Can a stranger to a contract sue on it? The answer is a firm no. If you and I make a deal, only you or I can take it to court. A third person, even if they were supposed to benefit from our deal, generally has no legal standing. That's the heart of the doctrine of privity of contract.
But you know there's always an exception, right? Let's look at this famous case, Chennaya versus Ramaya. An elderly woman gifted some property to her daughter, but there was a catch.
The daughter had to agree in writing to pay a yearly sum of money to her own maternal uncle. The daughter agreed, got the property, and then flat out refused to pay her uncle a single rupee.
So here's the legal puzzle. The uncle is a complete stranger to that contract between the mother and daughter. He wasn't in the room, he didn't sign anything. Based on that privity rule we just talked about, he should be out of luck, right? But can he actually sue?
And the court said, yes, he could sue. This is a huge deal and a major exception in Indian law. The court's logic was that even though the uncle was a stranger to the contract itself, he wasn't a stranger to the consideration. The whole reason the daughter got the property was on the condition that he would be paid. So, in India, a third party can enforce a contract if the consideration was provided for their benefit.
All right, for our last section, let's talk about the real unicorns of contract law. The rare cases where a promise is binding, even with no consideration at all.
So as you can see here, yeah, most contracts, the vast majority, need that quid pro quo. But look at these other slices. The law carves out these small but super important exceptions for specific situations where a promise should be honored even if nothing was exchanged right then and there. And here are the top 3. First, a written, registered promise made between close relatives out of natural love and affection. Second, a promise to pay someone for something they've already done for you voluntarily. Think about it. Someone finds your lost wallet and you're so grateful you promise a reward later, that promise can be enforced. And third, a written promise to pay a debt that's so old that a creditor can't legally sue for it anymore. In these special cases, the promise itself is powerful enough.
So what's the big takeaway here? Consideration is absolutely the foundation of most contracts. It's the price of a promise. But the law is also smart and flexible. It recognizes that in special situations based on relationships, fairness, and past good deeds, a promise deserves to be legally binding even if it's technically free. So the next time you make a promise, or someone makes one to you, take a second to think about it. Now that you know the rules, when is it just a casual remark? And when is it actually the price of something more? The answer might just surprise you.